German civilians cried when American soldier S knocked on their doors. At night WW2 clear channel की story. Number 2 start होगी है. The village lay under a heavy blanket of night. Cold winds swept through narrow cobblestone streets, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and the acrid tang of distant artillery. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and behind each curtain, families huddled together, hearts hammering. The moon hung low, casting silver light on frost-covered rooftops. Somewhere far off, an explosion shook the earth, and the soft cries of frightened children broke the heavy silence. From the darkness beyond the edge of the village, faint silhouettes moved with precision. American soldiers advanced cautiously, their boots crunching on frozen ground, rifles slung, flashlights briefly cutting through the night. One by one, they approached the heavy wooden doors of homes. A knock echoed sharply, startling the occupants. Mothers clutched children, men froze mid-step, and elderly faces pressed to the keyhole, wide-eyed. Fear gripped every heartbeat. This night, this knock, was not unique. Across the collapsing German heartland, similar encounters unfolded. Each house held trembling families. Each street bore the tension of imminent confrontation. The Americans were coming, and the civilians had nowhere to hide. The Allied forces, having secured Normandy after D-Day in June, had pushed relentlessly across northern France and Belgium. American divisions, seasoned by months of combat, moved with precision, armored columns cutting paths through devastated villages and shell-scarred towns. Behind them, the German front lines, strained and fragmented, struggled to mount any effective resistance. Soldiers were exhausted, supplies were scarce, and morale was fading under the weight of repeated defeats. Within Germany itself, the civilian population felt the pressure of a war creeping into their streets. Refugees poured in from the east, fleeing the Soviet advance, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Entire families had abandoned farms and homes, carrying what they could on carts or in worn suitcases, hoping for safety that seemed increasingly elusive. Cities braced for bombardment. Small towns prepared for the unknown. Blackouts were enforced nightly. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of daily life, and ration lines lengthened as supplies dwindled. The American advance was both methodical and shocking in its speed. Armored columns appeared suddenly over hills, soldiers dismounted with caution, and towns that had once been insulated from the horrors of the front found themselves facing a foreign military presence. Reports filtered back to Berlin describing entire villages surrendering without a fight, leaving German troops to question not only their strategy, but their very purpose. For civilians, these arrivals were terrifying and unpredictable. Some were relieved, hoping for protection from bombings or the end of Nazi coercion. Others feared violent reprisals, remembering rumors of atrocities committed on both sides. American forces operated under strict orders to minimize unnecessary violence. Officers emphasized discipline. Civilians were not the enemy, but caution was mandatory. Reconnaissance units scouted ahead, seeking signs of resistance, while infantry prepared for sudden confrontations. Each encounter was a delicate negotiation between authority and fear, with soldiers aware that a misstep could lead to tragedy. Villages became testing grounds for rules of engagement, where human instinct collided with military protocol. Germany itself was a patchwork of fear and uncertainty. In the Rhineland, towns reported shattered infrastructure, decimated by Allied air raids. Along the Moselle and Rhine rivers, bridges had been destroyed to slow the invaders, leaving civilians stranded with limited means of escape. Refugee columns converged with retreating troops, creating scenes of chaos. The sound of distant artillery and the occasional roar of approaching tanks were constant reminders that the front had arrived. For the Americans, the march into Germany was a mix of strategic planning and improvisation. Every town entered required assessment, potential threats, civilian needs, and the logistics of securing supply lines. Soldiers documented their encounters, noting both compliance and resistance, while commanders adjusted tactics based on real-time intelligence. While the broader picture was military in nature, the human element, families trembling behind doors, farmers clutching what remained of their livestock, children staring wide-eyed at foreign soldiers, was immediate, pressing, and often unpredictable. These early incursions into German soil foreshadowed the larger societal impact yet to come. Villages that had known only whispers of war now confronted the physical presence of combatants. Streets that were quiet under nightfall became arenas of tension and anxiety. Each knock at a door, each flash of a flashlight across frost-covered windows, was emblematic of a larger reality. Germany was no longer distant from the war. It was at its doorstep. And as the Americans pressed forward, the lives of ordinary civilians were about to be forever altered, leaving an indelible mark that would define both memory and history. The stage was set for encounters that would merge the brutal reality of military advance with the fragile resilience of human life. Fear, anticipation, and uncertainty hung in the air like a dense fog, ready to be pierced by the footsteps of soldiers and the trembling responses of civilians. Each interaction, however fleeting, would become part of the broader tapestry of late-war Germany. Life under Nazi rule had shaped the German civilian psyche for more than a decade. Propaganda was woven into every aspect of daily existence. Newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts reinforced loyalty to the Reich, portraying the Allies as ruthless invaders and emphasizing the invincibility of German arms. Children were indoctrinated through Hitler Youth programs. Adults were reminded that obedience was not just duty, but a moral imperative. Fear was omnipresent. The Gestapo monitored neighborhoods. Rumors of denunciations spread quickly, and dissent could mean imprisonment or death. Civilians were trained to expect danger, and over time this conditioning created a blend of caution, anxiety, and resignation. By late 1944, however, cracks in this narrative were undeniable. Reports from the front lines contradicted official propaganda. Villages were no longer merely reporting ration shortages or air raids. They were witnessing the tangible presence of enemy soldiers. Civilians had to reconcile decades of state-led fear with the reality of disciplined, methodical troops entering their streets. Rumors circulated about Americans. Some said they were harsh, others that they were fair. For families who had only known fear, every knock on the door carried both dread and cautious hope. Expectations varied. Some civilians believed resistance was futile. Others clung to rumors of potential mercy. Housewives and elderly men whispered about what they had heard from refugees fleeing the east, or from neighbors who had surrendered their towns without incident. American soldiers were often described as strange, speaking an unfamiliar language, carrying equipment that seemed both advanced and intimidating. For children, the soldiers were figures of awe and terror. For parents, they were a test of courage, morality, and the survival instinct. Nazi orders for occupation, issued sporadically as the front collapsed, reflected a desperate attempt to maintain control. Civilians were instructed to avoid panic, to follow local authorities, and in some cases to sabotage advancing forces. Yet these directives were often impractical. In small villages, local leaders were either absent, overwhelmed, or hesitant to enforce rules. When the Americans approached, families faced decisions without guidance. Open the door or hide, obey or flee, trust or fear. Every action carried consequences. Early encounters between American soldiers and civilians revealed a complex interplay of discipline, fear, and humanity. Officers emphasized restraint. Civilians were to be treated as non-combatants. Soldiers approached homes cautiously, often knocking rather than entering unannounced. They assessed the environment for potential threats, all while communicating in gestures, broken German, or interpreters. These small interactions, children peering through windows, mothers clutching infants, men stepping forward to meet strangers, were charged with tension. Fearful compliance was common, yet in some cases, soldiers' professionalism and fairness helped to ease the initial terror. The civilian mindset was shaped by years of uncertainty and preparation for the worst. Many expected violence, many feared it. Even those who had prepared food or blankets for soldiers approached the door reluctantly. Trust was not easily given. Behind closed shutters, families debated what to do, weighing survival against loyalty to a regime whose promises were crumbling. Every knock became a measure of courage. Every flashlight beam against a frost-covered window was a test of nerves. As American units advanced through these towns, a pattern emerged. Civilians responded with fear, curiosity, and careful observation. Soldiers, trained to minimize casualties and maintain order, documented these interactions meticulously. Reports later emphasized both the successes and the unexpected difficulties of navigating the civilian environment. Human stories of relief, shock, and quiet acts of humanity began to accumulate alongside the tactical and strategic assessments. In this delicate balance, the stage was set for personal encounters that would define the final months of the war. Each house, each family, each street represented more than geography. It was a crucible of emotion, shaped by propaganda, fear, and survival instinct. The Americans were not merely soldiers moving through territory. They were the catalyst for a profound human reckoning. Behind every door knocked. The weight of history and the fragility of life intersected, creating moments of tension that were both unique and emblematic of late-war Germany. These stories of fear, anticipation, and cautious interaction were more than anecdotal. They revealed the human dimensions of military occupation, setting the stage for angles that would explore technology, tactics, morality, and leadership in the encounters to follow. Human perspective fear was the immediate visceral response of German civilians. In small villages, nightfall brought tension that was almost palpable. Families huddled together, listening for the crunch of boots on frozen streets, or the distant hum of armored vehicles. Every shadow seemed a potential threat, every sudden noise a harbinger of violence. Mothers clutched their children, whispering reassurances while their own hearts raced. Men stepped forward reluctantly, unsure whether to confront or hide. Elderly residents, who had lived through the First World War and years of propaganda, felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The American presence triggered a complex mix of hope, fear, and disbelief. Some believed the soldiers might bring an end to tyranny. Others feared pillage, arrest, or retribution. The trauma of the past decade, air raids, forced conscriptions, and relentless propaganda, coalesced in these moments, leaving civilians suspended between caution and curiosity. Tactical perspective. American soldiers approached towns with careful precision. Infantry units, reconnaissance teams, and armored columns coordinated movements to secure key points while minimizing unnecessary risk. Patrols scouted ahead for potential ambushes, noting terrain, street layouts, and civilian activity. Soldiers often dismounted to move quietly through narrow lanes, employing a blend of visibility and caution. Flashlights swept over doors and windows to detect movement, while radios relayed updates to command. The tactics emphasized controlled presence over brute force. Villages were entered systematically, with units spreading to cover streets and key buildings while avoiding panic among civilians. The combination of careful scouting, disciplined advancement, and clear chain of command ensured that each encounter could be assessed in real time, balancing military necessity with human consideration. Technological perspective technology played a subtle but critical role. Jeeps, half-tracks, and armored cars allowed rapid deployment across the countryside, enabling forces to maintain momentum. Communication relied on portable radios, signaling devices, and prearranged codes to coordinate movements. Soldiers used flares and lanterns to illuminate dark streets while remaining wary of drawing attention. Even mundane tools, maps, compasses, and binoculars, were essential to navigate villages whose layouts were unfamiliar. The contrast between advanced American mobility and the civilians' static, rudimentary environment heightened the psychological impact. Modern vehicles glided over frost-covered roads, engines muffled yet authoritative, while families observed from shuttered windows. The presence of technology reinforced both awe and fear, creating a tangible separation between occupiers and the occupied. Leadership perspective. Officers played a decisive role in shaping interactions. Orders emphasized discipline, respect for civilians, and the minimization of violence. Commanders briefed their men on what to expect. Non-combatants were to be treated as neutral. Windows and doors could signal surrender or curiosity, and gestures of compliance were to be met with caution, not aggression. Leadership extended beyond military efficiency. It encompassed psychological management. Officers walked the line between asserting authority and encouraging empathy, understanding that each encounter had implications for broader civilian cooperation. Reports from the field reveal the conscious effort to train troops in both tactical awareness and humane conduct. Decisions made in those streets were not merely operational, they carried moral weight, shaping the Americans' reputation and affecting the course of local experiences. The convergence of human emotion, tactical planning, technological advantage, and leadership discipline created a complex tapestry. Civilians' fear was met with methodical precision. Soldiers' efficiency was tempered by orders emphasizing restraint. Technological superiority was balanced with an understanding of the human impact. Each layer reinforced the others, ensuring that encounters, while tense, remained structured and avoidable in terms of unnecessary harm. Propaganda had instilled profound fear of the Americans. German civilians, conditioned by over a decade of messaging, often expected brutality. Posters, radio broadcasts, and school indoctrination depicted Allied soldiers as merciless invaders who would destroy property, seize resources, and punish the population indiscriminately. Refugees fleeing the front lines reinforced these notions, recounting stories of harsh treatment, either exaggerated or accurate. Civilians' expectations were filtered through this lens of fear. When American soldiers knocked on doors, the sight of uniformed men carrying unfamiliar weapons confirmed many preconceptions. Even as soldiers adhered to strict orders, the weight of anticipation created heightened anxiety. Moral and ethical dilemmas, American troops faced their own dilemmas. While officers emphasized humane conduct, each interaction carried uncertainty. Civilians might conceal weapons or act unpredictably. Soldiers had to reconcile their training with instinctual caution. Decisions about whether to enter a home, distribute food, or question residents required constant judgment. Treating prisoners of war and civilians ethically while maintaining operational security demanded discipline. There were moments of ambiguity. Refugees seeking assistance, children left alone, or elderly residents trembling in fear, where compassion had to be weighed against tactical prudence. Reports later emphasized these tensions, highlighting the human dimension of military occupation and the responsibility borne by those enforcing it. Reflections on rules of engagement. Rules of engagement provided structure, but could not eliminate the unpredictability of human behavior. Orders mandated restraint, requiring soldiers to distinguish combatants from civilians rapidly. Clear procedures were combined with situational judgment. Soldiers were instructed to knock, communicate intent, and observe compliance. Yet each village was unique. Layouts differed, residents reacted differently, and the environment presented hazards. The enforcement of these rules was not purely technical. It demanded understanding of psychology, observation, and improvisation. Units that navigated these rules effectively often avoided violence fostering cautious trust between occupiers and civilians. Conversely, missteps could escalate fear and provoke unnecessary conflict. The intersection of propaganda, moral responsibility, and operational guidelines defined the dynamics of each encounter. Civilians, conditioned by fear, confronted disciplined soldiers navigating a structured yet flexible system. The careful orchestration of tactics, technology, and leadership intersected with unpredictable human emotion, creating tense, cinematic moments in otherwise quiet villages. These angles, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, ethical, and procedural, set the stage for the pivotal interactions that would soon unfold. Behind every door lay the potential for fear, misunderstanding, or relief. The framework established here would shape the decisive moments of confrontation, where tension reached its peak and the outcomes became immediate and personal. The night was heavy with frost, and the silence of the village streets was broken only by distant artillery and the occasional howl of wind through bare trees. Houses stood dark, windows shuttered, the faint glow of moonlight reflecting off icicles hanging from eaves. Footsteps approached along the cobblestones, crisp, deliberate, measured. American soldiers moved in formation, their boots crunching against frozen mud, rifles slung over shoulders. They paused at the first row of houses, assessing shadows, listening for movement, scanning for any signs of ambush. At the edge of a narrow lane, a pair of soldiers reached a weathered door. One raised a hand and knocked. 3 solid raps that reverberated through the quiet night. Inside, a family froze. A mother clutched her infant, eyes wide, while the father hesitated, one hand resting on the edge of the doorframe. A teenager pressed against the wall, trembling. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a shuffling sound as the father slowly opened the door, peering into the narrow beam of a flashlight. Words were exchanged, halting and fragmented. "We are Americans. No harm. Follow instructions." The tone was calm, but the fear in the family's eyes was palpable. Elsewhere in the village, other soldiers approached houses in parallel. Some families responded quickly, opening doors in cautious compliance. Others recoiled, shutting windows or retreating into dark corners. Miscommunication was common. Gestures meant to reassure were sometimes misinterpreted as threats. At one house, a soldier motioned for a man to step outside. The man, terrified, moved too slowly, and the soldier's finger hovered near the trigger for a brief, tense moment. Training and discipline prevented catastrophe, but the potential for violence hung in the air like frost. Each interaction was charged with immediacy. Each knock carried the weight of months of fear and anticipation. The American units relied on coordination. Hand signals, quiet commands, and quick assessments ensured that movements were deliberate. Teams swept the streets in overlapping arcs, illuminating alleyways with lanterns or flashlights, alert for hidden threats. Civilians, conditioned by propaganda and months of war, watched silently, hearts pounding. Children peeked through curtains, wide-eyed, while elderly residents remained pressed against walls, gripping furniture for reassurance. The tension was almost tactile, visible in trembling hands, shallow breaths, and the taut posture of bodies braced for danger. Technology accentuated the psychological impact. Half-tracks rumbled along main roads, headlights dimmed to avoid blinding the soldiers but sufficient to cast long shadows. Radios crackled intermittently, transmitting updates from scouts who moved ahead to assess the next street. Maps and compasses guided movement, yet no instrument could predict human response. Each house, each door, each shuttered window represented a decision point. Would the occupants comply? Would they panic? Would a frightened gesture provoke a misunderstanding? The answers emerged in moments, brief and irreversible. Leadership played a continuous role in diffusing tension. Officers moved among their men, observing interactions, issuing quiet corrections, and providing guidance on approach. They reminded soldiers to speak slowly, use gestures, and avoid sudden movements. The emphasis was on control, precision, and minimizing fear. Yet leadership also demanded rapid decision-making. When a young girl ran into the street clutching a doll, soldiers had to adjust their formation, ensure the safety of both the child and their unit, and proceed without breaking momentum. Each situation was unique, unscripted, and emotionally charged. The village itself became a stage of micro-conflicts, where fear, anticipation, and discipline intersected. Families made snap decisions to comply or conceal. Soldiers measured each step, balancing caution with authority. The potential for misunderstanding was constant. A sudden noise, a shutter slamming, a dropped pan, the creak of a floorboard could trigger alarm. Yet, over time, patterns emerged. Most civilians responded to calm gestures, steady voices, and clear instructions. Each successful encounter reinforced confidence for both soldiers and residents. Still, the tension never fully dissipated. By the end of the first hour, the Americans had reached the core of the village. Each door knocked upon, each family contacted, represented a small victory in maintaining order and avoiding conflict. The streets remained quiet but alert, a fragile balance held between human fear and disciplined action. Soldiers documented observations, noting compliance, anomalies, and potential risks. The night's encounters foreshadowed what was to come, a negotiation of authority, trust, and survival in a landscape where every heartbeat carried weight. Climax, Turning Point. Section 2, 860 words. Resolution came gradually. Families began to relax slightly once they understood that compliance did not result in immediate harm. A mother allowed her child to peek from behind the curtain. A father stepped fully into the doorway, showing empty hands. Soldiers, maintaining their measured approach, offered brief explanations, simple instructions, and gestures of reassurance. Some distributed small rations or requested information about the village, turning tense moments into structured interaction. Relief was visible, though tempered by lingering fear. Civilians remained wary. The war had instilled habits of caution that could not vanish overnight. The strategic importance of securing cooperation was clear to the officers. These encounters were not merely tactical. They influenced the broader operational environment. Civilian compliance ensured smoother movement for units, reduced potential ambushes, and allowed supply lines to function. Soldiers documented each interaction meticulously. Reports described the demeanor of residents, noting signs of trust, hesitation, or potential resistance. Decisions made in these hours affected subsequent strategies, guiding the allocation of forces and the timing of further advances. Some families exhibited cautious initiative. They offered information about local terrain, livestock, or missing neighbors. Others withheld, waiting for confirmation that the Americans' presence was not a precursor to violence. This negotiation of trust was subtle yet critical. Soldiers adapted to each response, modulating tone, gestures, and movement. Small acts, a nod, a step back, the lowering of a weapon, created signals of reassurance that were understood immediately by wary civilians. The psychological dimension extended beyond immediate safety. Americans recognized that human perception could influence the overall success of an occupation. Civilians' responses, fear, relief, cooperation, would ripple outward, affecting neighboring villages and towns. Successful interactions could encourage surrender, mitigate panic, and reduce casualties. Missteps, however minor, had the potential to ignite conflict, reinforce propaganda-fueled fear, or provoke unnecessary aggression. The balance was delicate, maintained by discipline, empathy, and situational awareness. By the early morning hours, the village had been traversed, contact established, and the immediate crisis passed. Families, while still shaken, began to adjust to the presence of foreign soldiers. Some retrieved blankets or food for the troops. Others remained behind doors, observing cautiously. The Americans moved through with a mixture of vigilance and efficiency, aware that each village represented both a human and operational challenge. These encounters revealed the duality of occupation, military objectives intertwined with human reality. Soldiers carried the weight of strategy and rules of engagement. Civilians bore the legacy of fear, propaganda, and uncertainty. Each resolved encounter, however small, marked a step toward stability, a fragile bridge between two worlds brought into contact by war. The night ended with a quiet that was different from before. Fear remained, but it was now tempered with the recognition of order, of structure, and of the Americans' disciplined approach. The village streets, once tense and foreboding, had become a scene of cautious coexistence. Soldiers documented lessons learned. Civilians internalized new realities. The events foreshadowed the broader process of occupation, where interactions would continue to define the human and military landscape. As dawn approached, both sides were left with the imprint of the night's encounters. Americans prepared to advance to the next settlement, and civilians faced the unfolding reality of life under occupation. The narrative of fear, tension, and negotiation was complete for this village. Yet the larger story of consequences, adaptation, and reflection was only beginning. The first light of dawn revealed streets lined with remnants of tension, shuttered windows slightly ajar, footprints in frost, and doors bearing marks from the night's encounters. Inside homes, families were beginning to process the events. Psychological trauma lingered like a heavy fog. Children awoke trembling, replaying the sudden knocks and strange voices. Mothers clutched infants with renewed vigilance, while fathers surveyed the empty streets with cautious relief. Even those who had complied fully found it difficult to shake the memory of near violence, the rapid succession of gestures, and the unknown intentions of the soldiers. Yet not all interactions were negative. Small acts of kindness had emerged amidst fear. A soldier had handed a warm blanket to a shivering child. Another had guided an elderly resident safely past the icy street. These gestures were brief, but for the families involved, they became emblematic of a humanizing presence within an otherwise tense environment. Civilians began to recognize that compliance, communication, and caution could yield protection or aid, while misjudgments might trigger panic. Material consequences were immediate as well. Houses remained structurally intact in most cases, but displaced items, open doors, and disturbed livestock created chaos. Families retrieved what could be salvaged, rearranging furniture and securing belongings. The streets, once orderly, bore traces of human anxiety. Dropped personal items, tracks from hurried movement, and scattered remnants of nightly routines interrupted. In some households, neighbors extended tentative offers of assistance, sharing limited food or warmth, creating a fragile network of mutual support. Mistrust, however, persisted. Rumors circulated rapidly. Whispers about intentions of the Americans, suspicions of local collaboration, and lingering fear of retaliation from the retreating German military or hidden Nazi loyalists. This mistrust affected social cohesion, altering how families interacted with neighbors and approached subsequent encounters with soldiers. Even simple gestures, a knock at the door, a friendly smile, were interpreted cautiously, filtered through layers of trauma and indoctrination. The combination of psychological impact, minor material disruption, and emergent social dynamics created a complex tableau. Families began to adapt slowly, balancing vigilance with tentative trust. Daily routines resumed, but with heightened awareness. The soldiers' disciplined approach had prevented widespread panic or violence, yet the human imprint of the night lingered in memory, shaping perception, behavior, and communal relationships. Civilians also began to leave detailed accounts in diaries or communicate through word of mouth, recording impressions of the soldiers' conduct, the structure of their advance, and the nuanced behavior that defied propaganda expectations. These observations would later contribute to historical understanding, providing vivid testimony of the nuanced interactions that defined the American advance through German villages. From a broader military perspective, the encounters in villages like these offered lessons that shaped operational policy. Reports compiled by unit officers highlighted the efficacy of disciplined advance, measured communication, and careful assessment of civilian behavior. Commanders noted that minor acts of kindness, restraint, and structured interaction facilitated cooperation, reduced resistance, and enhanced overall operational efficiency. In the weeks following these initial contacts, standard operating procedures were refined to prioritize both safety and humane treatment, ensuring that similar encounters across occupied territories would follow a predictable pattern. Historical accounts corroborate these observations. Diaries of soldiers, combined with official after-action reports, emphasize the dual nature of occupation. Each village was both a tactical objective and a human environment. Compliance was achieved not solely through the threat of force, but through careful navigation of fear, anticipation, and negotiation. The documented observations revealed recurring patterns. Households that encountered respectful and disciplined soldiers tended to comply more readily in subsequent interactions, while those who experienced even minor tension or miscommunication were more likely to respond with fear or hesitation. Policies were adjusted accordingly. Military leadership emphasized pre-encounter briefings, ensuring that units understood the dual imperative of operational security and civilian welfare. Officers were trained to anticipate miscommunications and to employ nonverbal cues to reduce tension. Rules of engagement were clarified. Civilians were to be approached with caution, threats avoided unless provoked, and acts of aid or protection encouraged when possible. Communication with higher command incorporated both tactical updates and human intelligence gathered from civilians, shaping subsequent strategies. The historical significance of these encounters extended beyond the immediate village. They influenced broader approaches to occupation across Germany. Scholars studying post-war records highlight the nuanced balance achieved by American forces between military objectives and civilian management. The interactions demonstrated that psychological understanding, cultural awareness, and ethical conduct were integral to operational success. For military historians, these encounters represent a model of disciplined advancement under complex social conditions, where the human dimension was inseparable from tactical achievement. The material and psychological consequences were documented alongside these strategic observations. Soldiers recorded instances of compliance, mistrust, and minor resistance, noting how discipline, leadership, and technology facilitated smooth operations. Civilians' reactions, ranging from terror to cautious relief, were meticulously logged, forming a corpus of evidence about the human cost of occupation. These reports later informed both military doctrine and historical narratives, providing insight into the interplay between strategy and lived experience. Civilians' first-hand accounts, often preserved in diaries, letters, or post-war interviews, revealed that the American approach, restrained, organized, and methodical, contrasted sharply with expectations shaped by propaganda. Families who had anticipated violence found that the soldiers' conduct was measured, professional, and, at times, unexpectedly compassionate. These interactions challenged preconceived notions, fostering cautious trust even amidst fear. In the broader scope of the war, these encounters demonstrated a critical lesson. Operational success in occupied territories depended as much on understanding human psychology as on the movement of troops or firepower. The strategic importance of civilian cooperation was intertwined with the moral and ethical conduct of soldiers, influencing both immediate outcomes and the perception of the occupying force. As soldiers moved on to the next village, leaving behind the traces of their passage, civilians were left to reconcile fear, relief, and the enduring imprint of the night's events. The streets, once tense and foreboding, were now quiet, but memory remained. Diaries, conversations, and local stories preserved the emotional and practical consequences of occupation. forming a bridge between immediate experience and historical record. These accounts, combined with military documentation, naturally lead into reflection on the broader human cost of war. The intersection of fear, discipline, morality, and survival in occupied villages provides a lens to consider the historical significance of these encounters, the resilience of civilians, and the ethical responsibilities of soldiers. The next section will explore these themes in a calm, philosophical closure. The echoes of that night lingered long after the streets fell silent. Families who had trembled behind shuttered doors carried memories that would endure for decades. The sudden knocks, the flash of light across frost-covered windows, the tense moments where fear and human judgment collided. These experiences were not isolated incidents, but emblematic of the countless small encounters that defined the closing months of the war. Each interaction was a mirror of human fragility, resilience, and the moral weight of decisions made under pressure. For the civilians, the American advance was a convergence of fear and relief. Years of propaganda, uncertainty, and terror were confronted by disciplined, humane presence. The contrast between expectation and reality left a profound imprint, shaping perceptions of authority, trust, and survival. Children, mothers, fathers, and the elderly alike were participants in a living lesson on the limits of fear and the capacity for cautious hope. Their responses, hesitant compliance, trembling gestures, tentative assistance, revealed the nuanced human calculus in moments of extreme stress. From the perspective of soldiers, these encounters underscored the responsibilities of military ethics in wartime. Operational success was inseparable from respect for non-combatants, restraint, and empathy. Leadership, training, and discipline converged to shape behavior that could either mitigate or magnify fear. Small acts of kindness or measured firmness had outsized effects, demonstrating that the human dimension of war, psychology, morality, and perception was as critical as tactics or firepower. Historically, these nights of quiet tension offer insight into the complex interplay between combat, occupation, and civilian life. They illuminate the consequences of fear, the ripple effects of trust, and the enduring importance of ethical conduct under duress. Beyond strategy and statistics, they remind us that war is experienced not only in battles, but in the fragile, intimate spaces where ordinary lives intersect with extraordinary circumstances. In reflecting on these events, one sees the duality of conflict, the machinery of war and the delicate humanity caught within it. These moments remain a testament to the endurance of civilian courage, the discipline of soldiers, and the subtle, profound ways in which human dignity persists even amid the chaos of history. अब यहाँ पर WW2 चेयर चैनल की स्टोरी नंबर 2 की स्टोरी का एंड हो गई. High German civilians cried when American soldier S knocked on their doors at night.